All right, folks, we're live stream, and so today's workshop's just to consider the LGNZ local election reform draft position paper, and I'm going to let Michael speak to that, seeing he's the one that's coordinated all this. The floor is yours, Squire.
Thank you, Mayor Clark. So on the 28th of March, I sent out to you all by email the position paper from LGNZ, so you had a copy, but also a quick report from me that set out what we needed to talk about, which basically covers the topics in the LGNZ paper, but also some of the topics that were raised when this was presented to the council meeting about things that you would like to discuss. So this is my proposal to sort of make our way through that to get a position from council so that we can draft the combined submission to go back to LGNZ, and we will coordinate at the end how we do that, because the position paper was due before our council meeting, and we just need to work out what we do to make that happen. But as I said, that can be done at the end when we, if we get to the position that we want to submit a paper, submit a submission. It's terrible on this. So without further ado, the first topic covered off in the LGNZ paper is the public's understanding of local government, which is broadly covered under the topic of civics education. I think very briefly, this is something that has been talked about for quite a number of years, and that the need to engage with our rangatahi, our school children, when they're at school, to actually help them understand the importance of, firstly, the democratic process, both central and local, but what actually councils do for you. So I know from my own experience, I was lucky in that in 1989 I was still at primary school, so there's my age, and that was when the councils were all amalgamated. So the newly formed Manawatu District Council came and did a magical mystery tour of all the schools in our area and presented what they were, how they got created, and what they did for our community. And then each of us were invited to send a classroom to the council to watch a council meeting. So I have a very clear memory and have had an understanding of that since that time. But since 1989, there hasn't been anything happening to local government that has caused anything like that to even remotely occur, and I think civics education has just in general withered away. So with that, that is my introductory monologue to this topic. I'm happy to facilitate any discussions and make any points down on possible submission on this point.
Tom.
Michael, what are the barriers to doing that now?
So for us to go?
Yeah.
Absolutely none. It's simply finding time with schools and what is what we understand to be quite a busy curriculum schedule already. But no, if we want to make contact with the schools and offer that as something that we do in our community, I don't believe there is anything that stops us from doing so. Thank you.
So from my perspective, a couple of things. There seems to be a lack of understanding the way government and central government and local government runs. I get a lot of questions to say, well, you know, why can't you just get on and do it? I say, well, you've got to understand how central government works. It forms a coalition of like minds at the beginning of the term, and basically for the next 3 years, that coalition, with a few exceptions, can just get on and get business done. But that's not our scenario. Our scenario, as we go into an election, we don't know who's going to be around the table, and from one meeting to the next, you often don't know which way people will vote. So that gives a much higher level of uncertainty around what are the key things, or the overarching stuff. And I think that's more than just school children that don't do it. I recently went to talk at Age Concern, and they had the same concerns as well.
I certainly think, Mayor Clark, the idea is that if you get them young, you've got them for their lifetime.
Yep.
But no, absolutely, it's that lack of visibility of local government in general. Central government, everyone knows what's happening because they monopolise the media. not unreasonably given what they do for people. But it's hard for local government to actually have that input. So, Trish?
Schools have the facility to choose whatever topic they like, and they teach the skills through the context. I wonder whether it would be appropriate, I don't know whether this is relevant to this, but whether it would be appropriate for us to have an open session on this for schools to attend, so that we could let them see the resource and see how they could possibly use it, because it's a good resource. I had a look at it, and I think schools would use it if they were aware, but in their busy lives they don't always see it. And there's, as you say, there's lots of learnings in it that you've got for life. So I would really think we could perhaps, I don't know if it's our role, but to be proactive about working with the schools.
Leslie?
Thank you. The lack of mandatory civics education in schools is a big problem, because what happens at the moment is a few schools are interested enough to do a bit. A lot of schools just choose in the busy curriculum to say we're too busy and it doesn't happen, so civics education doesn't happen. I know from a political perspective that offers from political parties to give even very neutral civics education are often turned down unless it was something like the introduction of MMP, when actually most schools were interested in having sessions from people who understood the system and the various alternatives and so forth. But the lack of mandatory civics education means that it's very much a hit and miss. There's a few schools that treat it seriously enough to do some sessions. There's a lot of schools where they just don't see it as something to put into the busy curriculum. So for the purposes of feeding back on this paper, quite different from what this council might try and do with individual schools in our own area, but for feeding back on this paper, I would like to see us actually support mandatory civics education, because my feeling is if it's not at that early stage, and if we're not preparing first-time voters to vote that first time, all the research shows if you don't vote the first time you become eligible, you are likely not to be a voter from then on. I've always believed strongly that civics education is a very important part of the mix if we're going to take, if the country is going to take seriously the issue of our strong democracy and maintaining our strong democracy. To me, civics education is a big part of that, and it's, although I recognise that saying it should be mandatory as part of the curriculum does put an extra load on teachers and schools. At the same time, we're talking about the fundamental democracy of our nation and educating the voters of the future, and we know that voter turnout is decreasing, and here is a way in which we can promote the importance of democratic education.
I agree with that, and can say that I was at high school when MMP came through. I know, right?
No, Darren's not agreeing to that, I'm afraid. He's stretched it a bit too far now.
And again, it was something that was both the referendum and then the first election, and so it was something that was obviously highlighted as part of that, and also included in that was, of course, the first free elections in South Africa, which was a significant moment of world history, and something that certainly my high school focused on. But again, those things get lost.
Yep.
And I agree. So that I'm sensing that there is a two-prong approach here, is that the councils probably need to engage with their own school communities to see what we can do locally, but that support for a national direction of making a mandatory civics approach in the national curriculum is the way to go.
But it could be a national national push that's delivered by us.
Yes, yeah,
So
absolutely.
we have a local flavour, so it doesn't put teachers on the map, as it were.
Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you. Evelyn?
Whilst I acknowledge that the way we're getting into this is through reforms to local government, sort of processes, and we can play a part in it, it's a bigger picture than that, because I think citizens as a whole don't seem to have anymore a very clear idea. I mean, schools sometimes run mock US presidential elections, but very rarely do they do anything similar to the processes as a whole. So it's not just us as citizens now, or our young now, but also immigrants, and so it's got to be a broader approach, because they've got to be able to reach people in words and language that they understand. I don't think, thinking of some of the things that people have asked for, that people necessarily understand where residents fit, all those sorts of things, permanent residents fit in voting, all those different things. So that's broader even than what is in school, because you're not reaching people who came to New Zealand before we offer this opportunity. What do we do for people who are here already? And that might require us looking at local media, for example, to help play a part. How we compel them is a whole different story, but is that us purchasing or combining with them to produce resources like they've done other years for, I forget the name of it, Newspapers and Education, was it? NIE?
It's a long time ago.
Yes, but those sorts of resources used to bring some of these issues, because adults would see them as well as the children.
But this resource would be able to be used by adults.
Yes,
Yes.
as opposed to being in front of it being in a classroom.
It could be either.
Yes.
Sorry.
No, not at all. No, I think that point is certainly well made, particularly with Invercargill being a refugee resettlement centre,
Yes.
that a number of people don't quite understand what their rights are, and that is, we need to work with those providers, such as the Red Cross, who do that settlement, to make sure that that is information that is provided. In addition and over and above any sort of civics education we can get in to get the children understanding what their role is in a society. So, Rhea, you had a comment, question?
Yeah, I do. Much like you, Michael, I was at high school when we were approached by the Electoral Commission that came through and taught students the difference between what first past the post was and MMP, and it was quite an in-depth situation, which was actually quite engaging. So I'm wondering if there is some mechanism that could be that the Electoral Commission engagement with schools happens once a year, or even before each term, where they teach civics and education about Parliament and local government. One of the things that the central government have at the moment is they have the youth parliament procedure, where each MP selects a youth parliament member. Maybe that's something local councils could do, with each one of the elected members selecting a youth member from a high school to work a day in your life and have a debate, a mock debate like we do in Parliament. I mean,
we do have youth council.
Yes, we do, and I'm just about to come into that, because we do have the youth council, but if you're already engaged, what are they going back to their high schools doing and reporting back to them what they're doing in youth council? So there's two steps there that I see that could actually work quite nicely together, with not only engaging here, as our youth council does, but actually back in their high schools and seeing what that looks and feels like. But there are those opportunities to look at those systems that are there.
Thank you.
And the other issue I raised with Michael just then was what happens if we try and pitch it to 15 and 16-year-olds knowing that they can't vote till they're 18? Do they take it on board and then it goes past them again and they're not into it until they get to midlife or whatever?
Yeah. Hopefully they would get excited and enthusiastic, so that as soon as they hit 18 they're raring to go to vote.
You're a pessimist.
And it's more that by addressing it at that school level, you are building the knowledge, because civics education is that broader understanding of the entire system, including whether or not residents have voting abilities, etc., and you know, the reasons why New Zealand doesn't have an upper house. And anyway, starting civics education at that younger age is building the knowledge that will stand people in good stead for the future when their entitlement to vote does come into play. And in fact, if there is going to be debate about lowering the voting age, it's an even better time to be engaging with those young people whose views will be an important part of the debate in whether or not the voting age is lowered.
And that's what I was saying before about sometimes not knowing what you're voting for. So if you go into the general election, and 6 months leading up to a general election, you know which way the party Mary's going on most issues, which way Greens are going, and so on, act. But when it comes to local bodies, you just suddenly hit with 30 names and you just scroll through the page, and it's a bit of a lottery in some ways, I think.
And that covers quite nicely there, Clark, the next topic.
Oh, well, no, Alex is going to...
Oh, I was just going to discuss what Councillor Soper was saying around the global conversation around lowering the voting age, because Scotland is actually a really good test case of where they lowered their voting age to 16 in 2014 ahead of the independence referendum. And what that has actually shown, and there's obviously the data that backs it, is that getting people involved younger and enabling them to vote at age 16 has demonstrated that they do then go on to continue voting lifelong, and then therefore you get far higher engagement. So there certainly is an argument for it that is backed by statistics. So yeah,
I guess it wouldn't sit well with some people using Scotland as an example if we think about three waters, but never mind. But it's interesting because
but at least they're engaged.
how do you engage the young people that are of the right age? Now, you and I both went to the last mayoral meeting we had with young professionals in town.
Yep.
So at that meeting there were 9 candidates, 9 of 10 went to the meeting, and there were 8 young professionals, and that group must be 100 strong, at least. And you'd think these are people who've got accounting, lawyers, very professional type people, and they just weren't interested. So yeah, how do you engage those?
Yes, but they hadn't had civics education in their schools, so
Possibly,
they hadn't built up the knowledge base to be interested enough to come out. And just another comment, when you think about civics education, you're not necessarily thinking about explaining particular parties' policies or individuals' policies to people. You're talking about the sort of education that gives potential voters the tools to do their own analysis and make their own decisions from an informed base. So you're not talking about going in with political parties putting forward their own policies or individuals putting forward their own policies. You're talking about civics education that gives you the broad knowledge to be able to analyse and do more about your own steps as to how you find out about this particular person who is standing for local government and their policies, but not necessarily have them there to fire questions at. It's more building the knowledge base.
Tom?
I think if, and I think there's probably unanimity that we, as a country, do need civics education, which would include local and national. Certainly in the case that was raised about Scotland, I mean, in the lead up to that, they did have civics education in the schools. Right, it wasn't just a kind of random make it 16.
That's right.
But I think as we talk about, and some of the things particularly that Councillor Soper said, why do we not have an upper house? I think just demonstrate that you just cannot have a sort of random councillor bowling up at a school to talk about it, right? You know, you would need a proper curriculum, and it would need to be, you know, properly taught. Otherwise, you would just get relatively, we would talk about that and talk about that and miss that bit, and so I think it probably needs to be encouraged at national level rather than. I think if we were going to do something as local government, I think there's a role there for local government New Zealand to develop a curriculum for that, you know, or when I say a curriculum, I probably mean a single 1 hour presentation actually, but, you know, rather than again just have people bowling up and doing their best in front of a class but without any, you know, teaching experience.
Okay.
Right.
All right, Michael, number
Thank you.
2.
Good steer on that one, thank you. So the second one is we've already discussed, the age-old issue for local government of understanding candidates and their policies. It's one that comes quite frequently when we see research or feedback as to why people don't vote or chose to not vote for a local election but vote for a national election. And it is quite simply, as the Mayor has said, people don't quite know how to find out what councillors stand for, because, as the Mayor said, national elections, you have a political party who backs their candidates, they will tell you what they stand for, everyone is of an understanding. As soon as you get to local government, each candidate stands essentially on their own platform. And even when there are politically aligned candidates, like in other cities, such, for example, the obvious example at the moment is Mayor Whānau in Wellington, endorsed by the Greens Party. That still doesn't actually mean that there is a party political platform that she is standing on. She is still standing on her own policies, just as an endorsed candidate from the Greens Party. So this one has tried to be filled by organisations like, I think it's policy.nz, who send a request out to every candidate with a number of questions to try and get some answers for that. One of the things that occurred in the recent Tauranga elections, they were very fortunate to be able to pick up a former TVNZ journalist, and one of the things that they've done, which has been was very well received by the Tauranga voters, was inviting every candidate to do a video session, answer a set number of questions. It's the same questions for every candidate, in the same order, filmed in the same location, and then that was presented on the Tauranga City's websites and social media pages to try and allow candidates to express positions or views on certain things, and so that there was a level playing field as another way of reaching more people rather than just relying on either town hall question and answer sessions, but also your 150-word blurb that you get in your candidate profile book, which, as we know, 150 words, I've just taken more than that in introducing this topic. It's not a lot. So I think the general view is that anything we can do that enhances the community's understanding of what candidates stand for has to be a good thing. And just so you know, we will be looking at doing the video sessions for candidates this time around. We're still just working out the logistics of that, but a heads up to the candidates watching this, that is something we will be looking to do. So with that, I'm happy to answer questions / have the discussion. Evelyn.
So last time there were questions posed. I can't remember whether it was one of the newspapers or somebody did, and went to every single person.
Yeah,
every candidate.
The Express did that.
The Express, and there were quite a number of candidates who did not respond in time. How do you think you would get buy-in from people, or does it matter that some don't buy in? You're talking about a level playing field, but that assumes that everybody who is a candidate is equally committed to being open and transparent about and prepared to front up.
Yeah, so you're right, it relies on the candidates wanting to take part in that. the experience from Tauranga was there were a handful of candidates who didn't want to. As soon as they saw the buy-in that Tauranga was getting from their video sessions and interviews, very quickly said, oh, we want to do one of those now. They saw the benefit of doing it. And so, as ever, as with all things, we can lead the horse to the trough. Making the horse drinketh of the trough is the issue, but I think, again, what happened to Tauranga tended to indicate that once people saw there was some benefit and it was actually working to engage with the community, people jumped on board. So, Tom?
I was a little bit surprised that, is this actually working? Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
I was actually a little bit surprised that recommendation 7 continued to recommend 150 words. I know that people tire very quickly of reading these things, so 150, I guess, is a compromise in that sense. But it just seemed to me, you know, that it was very, very difficult to get anything other than the most basic information about yourself into 150 words. And you're torn between, on the one hand, want to provide some biographical information, which is actually what it says there, and then, but also on the other hand, you want to say something about policy, and it's actually impossible to do both in 150 words. So my own view, you wouldn't want to make it an essay, but I think 200 words would be better, just my view. One thing I would say about the questionnaires that we were sent from various places, one reason that I never responded to all of them was they start with a series of personal questions, which I actually found inappropriate. You know, they've got a 150-word biography, so the questions you should be set are questions about policy, and then you can talk about policy. But all of them start with some, you know, okay, fairly basic personal questions, but people don't always want to answer them. And when I looked at it, I just thought, I'm not going to answer that.
No, I certainly can say that they're Tauranga videos, but other than saying, can you introduce yourself? That's basically it. It's straight into what's your position on, or tell us what you would bring as a councillor. And I think that's certainly the model we would adopt for that reason. So I think, Mayor Clark, you had something that I've got Darren and then Leslie.
Yeah, so I guess the way it works at the moment, we end up with, if you include the mayor, 13 parties. So everybody's off on their own. It'll be Walker giving a spiel about something. One of the things I learnt from the last election, and forgive me if you don't like the Let's Go Invercargill framework, but what it did polarise, it did cluster candidates behind what I thought was the most critical things that were facing the city, which was rate increases, the museum, and SDE at the time. And so you can overload people with too much policy. If you look at the national election last time round, the major parties, and certainly Labor and those to the right, were all talking about crime, health waiting lists, and lack of attendance at school. They were the three big things that come out, and yet once they get past the election, we're all talking about economic development. It's interesting, I think, for people to grab hold of what's important to them, but how do you do that when you've got 13 individuals all competing against each other and looking for a point of difference as well?
Yeah, no, it is absolutely the challenge. Darren?
So a couple of things. One of the challenges of putting out the offer for people to put that information forward and they don't take it and then realise it's got traction, quite often comes down to the fact that they've not read the opportunity, and as an indication of the fact that if they're not going to read the information about being a candidate, they're probably not the right person to be sitting at the table in the first instance. Draft recommendation 7, I think, is actually, it's quite good. So you've got a 150-word biography, which forces you to be frugal with your words and not verbose. Who are you? What's your why? And then you get into policy with the additional 500 words around those questions. Again, you've got to be relatively frugal and to the point. Less is more, I guess, is the lesson. And so I come from a press background where it is about brevity. And if there's four 4 or 5 standard questions with a 500-word maximum, it'll work. But again, it's up to people to take those opportunities, and those that miss out, you need to carefully examine the how they missed out. If I go back 2 elections, there were mayoral profiles in the Otago Daily Times. Mine was missed out, and they said, well, you didn't get it in. They found it in another folder. You know, that was a fault in their system, and they had to publish it later, which was actually quite pointless. Therein is the difference, whereas people who just completely miss it, you've lost that opportunity. And again, that's deadlines and instructions and finding appropriate candidates. The information that's contained in those biographies and answers, though, is the key. And I don't know that we have much control over that, because in the many successive elections I've been a part of, I've seen a lot of people putting forward things that they want to do that are actually not our domain at all. And again, maybe that goes back to the lack of civics training in schools or what. But, you know, very little in quite a few cases due diligence done from people who want to be a candidate in local government as to what local government is and how you're going to achieve things. I love the people who go, I'm going to do this. You're not going to do anything unless you find 6 friends. But you can advocate for your position. And again, that's just a lack of awareness around people. I think last time, Mike, we did run a couple of information training nights for people who wanted to be candidates, and I thought that was a great idea.
Yeah.
Weren't a lot of people that went along, but I still think it's something that we need to do this time through as well.
Yep. And I can say, Councillor, that is in our planning. Leslie.
Thank you. I was just going to say, to add, I think we should, in our submission, support draft recommendation 7. I'm a little bit leaning towards what Tom said. The 150-word limit and the 500-word limit on the answers to 4 or 5 standard questions is very tight. And I think there could be a bit more leeway, like 200 words and perhaps up to 750 words for the answers to 4 or 5 questions. Because answers to 4 or 5 questions with a 500-word limit across all the answers, that's 100 words. 100 words gets used up very quickly. So I just think draft recommendation 7 we should support. I also think there's potential to support the draft recommendation 9 for those civic organisations like the National Council of Women and others who still actually organise Meet the Candidates events. I do think there's a role to support either by helping to run those events or by funding the politically neutral organisations to do so. I know it's slightly old-fashioned to say Meet the Candidate events are still important, but actually they are. People do still like the opportunity to face-to-face candidates where possible, and I do think there's potential to support that in draft recommendation 9. So, yeah, that's what I would say on this one.
Just as an acknowledgement that a standard type page is about 250. So if you're opening it up to 500 or 750, you're really saying 3 type pages long. So that's quite extensive, really.
Yeah, but if you're talking about answers to 5 questions,
Yeah, I understand.
you're talking about asking people some meaty issues that you want meaty answers on, and I should also have said, and it's incorporated in recommendation 7, the video thing. I just think it's a no-brainer. I think that opportunity is just something that should be offered.
Yeah.
So, I was just going to say, one of the few things I agreed with Tim on before the last term he was here was the lack of those public meetings anymore. He said there was a time where if you had Meet the Candidates or Meet the Mayoral Candidates, the Scottish Hall would be absolutely full to overflowing. But he said those days are gone now. I mean, we had one good one at Ascot last time, or the time before? Last time, I think. But when we went out and did just the candidates as opposed to the mayoral candidates, sometimes the candidates outweighed the people in the community. We went to South City and there was 7 or 8 or 12 people in there just just not the interest. So I think you're right, Leslie. I think the ability just to click onto a video and just look at it and say, oh, yeah, I know him. Oh, gee, I don't agree with what he said there. And they can just scroll through and listen. I'll come to you. Ria.
Just picking up on what Councillor Soper spoke about with recommendation 7, with the 4 standard questions that we get asked. I'm not sure what other candidates felt in the last local body election, but we were hit and bombarded by quite a lot of national organisations with questions that actually didn't all fit with what we needed here at a local level. So when we talk about local or national questions, are they relevant to our electorate? Was my concern. Some of them were, some of them weren't. They were more pointed at the big metropolitan cities, which left it really hard for you as a candidate to actually get some traction when public are reading those online. So that I found that was a bit difficult, but you know, you do it anyway because you want to put out what relates relatively to what you're doing here. Another one of the recommendations, I think, was recommendation 9. Last time in the election we had a candidate running for mayor run public meetings, spread out from Invercargill, from Ototara out to Makarua, and you know, it was questioned at the time, can a candidate do that? But there was that space there for them to do, and quite rightfully they took advantage of that and did so. And that gave a platform for all members, whether you're running for mayor or councillors, to have your say and to be met by the public. But as you said, Mayor Clark, you know, the candidates often outrun the people that were coming to see you. The public meeting at the Ascot was really, really good. They had an independent facilitator, but the issues about that was they were behaving like a first past the post, the organisation behind them, and only wanted the top 2 selectors of the mayoral candidates being there, yet that wasn't done with a scientific post. So there are ums and ahs and yeses and nos, but I think anything and improvements of what we can do and submit and support in here really is to the benefit of local government and civics and our education, or educating our public about what we stand for. But yeah, that's just my feedback to those.
Thank you.
So Leslie raised an interesting point. I'll come to you in a minute, Trish, which was the issue that some other groups in our community meet the candidates, and it's always left me with the view that maybe that's something council should do. Council
Yes.
running up to an election should get an independent facilitator. It could be somebody from out of town if you want to, and just have a series of meetings around and just say, come and meet your candidates.
Yeah,
Do it for the mayoral stuff, do it for the
yeah.
councillor stuff. Because Tony organised a lot of them last time around, and they were all over
Really
the place.
good, yeah. Can I just say, add to that, often, I'm not sure what everyone else feels, often the people that are running the Meet the Candidate events are asking questions that are either not fit for your role, it's questions that actually don't actually add to the grit of what you're actually going to do as a councillor, or what council actually does. So there's often a misstep from central government requirements to local government, and often, like we've asked about health measures, for instance, what are we going to do as council to help fund the healthcare system? You know, ask questions like that. Well, I'm sitting there thinking, actually, we don't get any taxpayer money as council to fund the healthcare system. So you often get asked questions from organisations that are more central government than actual local council. And I think even educating facilitators on that would be actually really good.
Trish.
Mine's probably been subsided now, but draft recommendation 9, even if there aren't many people at the Meet the Candidates night, I think for those who turn up and make the effort, it's of value. And I can think back to Bluff, last round, when there weren't so many, but those who were there really appreciated it and asked in-depth questions, and we stayed for some time. So I would really encourage us to have those Meet the Candidate nights as often as we can, because some people will make an effort to get to them. Of course, the thing is to try and get as many people there as we can, but at least for those who choose to, they get the benefit of it.
I think sometimes putting a face to it is really helpful as well. I can think back to the last election where we had, well, I won't mention his name, but he's active at the moment, and we had another woman that was, I guess, in loose terms, a conspiracy theorist. And when you saw what they wrote, it actually made quite a bit of sense. But when they got to the meeting, they didn't make sense, and people were just saying, "Whoa, that's a bit too radical for me." So I mean, I don't know, I mean, I could, if Darren's worked in media, I could get him to do my 150 words or whatever. So you can get people to do it for you. You can use AI, but it's when you actually get to the meeting and you meet the people face to face, you think, no, that's not where I want to go. So I think we lose a bit of that face to face stuff now at the moment, because everything else is very prescriptive. Yeah, Alex.
I absolutely agree with the fact that I think that attending the public meetings is a real benefit, and us hosting some of the public meetings would probably be a benefit as well. But I do think that that only goes some way. There's a lot of personal responsibility on you as an individual candidate to actually get out there and get to the community and not expect the community to come to you. So I just really want to be mindful of that. That if you're looking at taking on the role, then you go to the community just as much as the expectation that they would come to you.
It's a combination.
So I think we had Darren and Ria with their hands back up.
Just one quick comment. I think the ideas for council-supported events are great in theory, but that would currently sit, he says, putting his Grinch hat on, as an unbudgeted expense.
Yes. That was the thought that crossed my mind as well.
Well, it was interesting because Tony did it last time, as
Yeah.
you know. She had no finances behind her. And they just arranged halls and things. I mean, there's ways that we can do that. It's just really the cost of getting a facilitator, somebody that can, hopefully somebody could do it relatively cheaply for us. But I just think we've lost those meetings, and if you allow candidates to organise their own meetings, it gets messy. It really did last time.
Well, sorry, it's not if you allow them to, because they've got the right to.
Sure.
If anybody wanted to host them, they could. So there's nothing to prohibit them from doing
No.
so.
You want to get a soapbox and stand up in Essex Street?
Yeah.
Well, I'm just going
Pour
to
in
touch
them
on
all.
that.
Pour in them all.
All right, well, thank you all on that one. I think I've got a good steer for a submission, but also some thinking to do for our own the election campaign coming up. So that moves us on to the next topic, which I've loosely described as voting methods. So this isn't first past the post or single transferable vote. This is the LGNZ proposal to move to booth voting. So at the moment we currently are required to use postal voting, which, as I'm sure you all know, post is a failing art form. What we did last time was use our orange wheelie bins, and then at the by-election that saw Councillor Broad elected, we had more orange wheelie bins. We borrowed some from Gore, who were very kind, following their by-election, and we had a 76% return in our orange bins. Tauranga had orange bins pretty much everywhere throughout the city, and their return in orange bins was something like 86%. Which is massive, and I think Wellington Central, the Lambton ward, had a similar sort of return for their by-election. So it's something that we will continue to move, and we have acquired more orange bins, so I'm just working to finalise where they will go. So that's dealing with the short term. The long term, what LGNZ are suggesting is to move to booth voting. So think of what you do for central elections. You have to go to a location to cast your vote. The only caveat I have on that is the advice we have received is that it's a threefold increase in cost. That's not a reason not to do it, but it's just something to be mindful of. And I think, Darren, you had your hand up.
Yeah, as the Grinch who was talking about unbudgeted expenditure just a few moments ago, I do believe that the conscious effort of going to cast a vote on election day gets a far greater response than an envelope that sits on the desk unopened for ages, and then when you finally do get around to sending it close to the last minute, you forget that there was a deadline and you've missed it. Yeah, conscious decision, and so you support the position, but yeah, understand the increased cost, which is where I think perhaps the government could step in to support democratic process.
Good luck with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll come to you in a minute, Alex. So my view on that is a couple of fold. I'm quite a supporter of the postal thing. I think those that are motivated will find a way. The flaw is in the urban areas as opposed to the rural areas. So in a rural area, it's really easy. You just put your envelope back in the letterbox and you put your wee flag up and the postie the following day picks it up. But that doesn't happen in the city, of course. You've got to go and find somewhere to deposit the voting form. And people say, well, you know, if they're not motivated to do that, they're not motivated to vote. Well, if they're not motivated to take their form and put it into an orange bin somewhere, they won't be motivated to go down to a school and go into a booth either. And the ideal outcome would be to have electronic voting, but the government's put a bit of a line in the sand on that and said no, because they're worried about overseas players corrupting the data and interfering with our voting system. I don't think would be high high up on the list for those players, those international players. There's other places that want to influence before us, but yeah. So.
No, and certainly just on the electronic voting, Mayor Clark, it is something that we constantly talk about. It has to form part of our future. But at the moment, certainly it is the security concerns that it's just it's a no. But so the reference group I'm on for Taitoara, when we've talked about that, the agencies have said it's not ever. They're just not confident the security mechanisms are available now to do it. So this is very much it needs to be in the mix, but it's just not an immediate.
And I think central government's view of this world is not just the corruption of the data, but if they allow local governments to go down that track and use cell phones or whatever, use electronic voting, then the pressure will come onto central government to do the same, which is where the corruption will probably impact. From the international players, they'd want to influence the national elections before they'd worry about us or Gore or whatever. Alex.
Thank you, Mayor Clark. I've really never understood why the Electoral Commission doesn't take charge of local government elections in the same way they do with central body elections.
Sure.
I've always felt like that's such a strange disconnect that we have to be responsible for ours. But
That's the next topic.
yeah. Okay, well, if that's the next topic, then
But
sorry for chopping ahead.
no. But your point is essentially the same sort of thing. What's the reason for the difference?
Yeah, what's the reason for the difference? And so when we are speaking about, like the 4-year term rather than 3-year term, as long as everything syncs up together, I think that's the main thing. And that I really think that the Electoral Commission should take responsibility for local elections as well as central elections. I think you're going to get a whole lot more buy-in if everything is all the same branding, like it's the voting time again, whether or not it is for local or if it is for central. It seems so redundant that they're so different.
I guess one of the issues would be that at the moment, central government's heading towards a 4-year term.
Yeah.
They're not going down that track for us. So we stay as a 3. Somewhere along the lines, if you do the basic maths, we'll both vote in the same year. And so what happens to the local, to the commission being able to deal with 2 elections at the latter part of the same year?
It's my understanding that 4-year term for us is up for discussion as well. So that those conversations are happening.
It's the fifth item.
Yeah. Sorry, we're racing ahead.
Sorry.
But I mean, it's all linked.
Is it correct in my understanding or my memory that we use the same elections entity as like 37 other councils do anyway?
Yeah.
So, like it just doesn't make sense to me. It should be the Electoral Commission.
Right. So I had on my list Leslie, Evelyn and Ria.
Yeah, getting back to the postal voting issue, I find it slightly amusing that the terminology used was postal voting is becoming unviable as a voting method. Postal voting has been unviable as a voting method for many years. I mean, in 2004, I sat on the select committee reviewing the election previously, and submitters on postal voting then were saying postal voting is old-fashioned, it's endemically open to corruption. You have parents who can use the voting papers of their absent children so they can be triple or more voters. And you know, as a select committee, we got lots of examples of that very thing happening. There were submitters who described to us how easy it was to do raids on post offices to steal voting papers and to steal voting papers out of rural letterboxes where it was known that people were not going to be picking up their mail certain times, and stealing voting papers out of urban letterboxes, particularly in multi-flat situations, was apparently already an endemic issue. So it just amuses me that we talk about, you know, that the heading on page 16 here is postal voting is becoming unviable, when we've known for years, if not decades, that postal voting has always been unviable, open to corruption, and just open to people forgetting that the voting paper is even there, even if they're not going to be multiple voters and use their absent children's voting papers as well. To me, the idea of tripling the expenses by having polling booths available at most can only ever be a temporary fill-in measure. I'm really keen that we, in any submission we do, urge that continuing and urgent investigations be done into the viability of online voting. I know that there are security concerns, but I see no reason why local government could not be used as a trial for online voting within the next couple of local body elections at the very least. I just think it's too easy to reject e-voting for security concerns when e-voting, we are fairly sure from a lot of the research, would increase turnout quite dramatically, especially among young voters whom we are desperate to get involved. And I just don't want to see any sort of delay in continuing to investigate the whole question of online and e-voting. It just to me is too important that we actually bring our voting system up to date, and yes, as secure as we can make it, but goodness, when you consider that postal voting has always been an insecure system, there has to be a way of bringing us up to date that that we can progress, not just say it's too hard.
Evelyn?
I find myself highly amused by the idea that we're going to go back to voting booths. Given that I started my career as a council employee, tabulating results from voting booths, I never thought I'd see it come back. Do have some questions, because what we're talking about is not entirely non-postal voting, it's the way the returns come back, because they still have to be posted out. So some of the ability to rort, I've lived a sheltered life, I never thought of some of that stuff. I'm not recommending it to anybody, but honestly, it would never have occurred to me that people went and raided other people's letterboxes to be able to rig the vote. Anyway, moving on. We still have to post them out in order for them to go back into the orange bins. So that particular, should people of Invercargill be doing these things, that temptation will still be available to them, at least until we sort out how we're going to do the electronic method in some safe way. And like Councillor Soper, I see that it's not if, it's when. And I'm not averse to Invercargill City being a guinea pig in that respect, because if it would engage people, I think it would be a positive. We do have a very disengaged, except when we want to put rates up, we have a very disengaged voting base, and how we get them engaged when most people have a smartphone, as long as they don't do what I do and leave them other people's vehicles, we're all good to go on election day. But I think that I still see some risk in the orange bins. Are they if there's ways of rigging, are people working out ways to rig those? Is there anything that's foolproof?
Yeah, there's no such thing that can be 100% foolproof. If there is a devious mind out there, they will find a way. But I do want to say, and for everybody listening on the live stream, that in the event that your voting paper is not received because some malevolent actor is out there, come in and do a special vote. Your special vote will override any ordinary vote that you have put in. So there are secure ways to ensure the security of our voting system. So yes, if you don't receive voting papers, come in and do a special vote. If someone has swiped it to try and vote on your behalf, your special vote will invalidate your ordinary vote.
Thank you for that piece of information, Mr. Morris, because I just thought if you lost it, that was your chance gone.
No, come in. If it gets ruined in the rain, because not every mailbox, mine's one of those, is dry, and I've even seen the dog has eaten my voting paper, and they brought in the torn voting paper.
Or the cat.
The dog has eaten the cat.
No, the cat scratched the voting paper. Sorry.
So nothing's foolproof over the microphone. So if you're in a voting booth, all you've got to do is drop an ignition source into the voting bins, and they all go up in smoke. Then there's a major scrabble to try and work out who voted and which way they voted and start all over again. So there's nothing foolproof.
No.
I think Leslie's idea is quite a good one, that trialling out in local government ahead of central government is a good way to go, because we are low risk. Even if they've tried it in some councils as opposed to all councils. Just let somebody do a trial.
Yeah, so in 2019 that was the plan. There were half a dozen councils lined up to do a trial. It got scuppered sort of at the last minute by security saying, the security agency saying not secure enough, but also central government hadn't passed the necessary regulations to allow it, because we need new regulations in place to enable it to happen. And since that time, each successive government have said not happening, because the security agencies have said not secure.
That's right.
So that's the international players.
Yes.
Or alternatively, what happened at the last election with Trump as well, where he went out and made some statements about the rigging of the election, or things have been lost, and major recounts go on, and court action, and everybody's trying to avoid that.
Absolutely. Right, so I've got Ria, Pania and Tom.
Thank you. I just want to touch on a couple of things. So with postal voting, and like Councillor Soper, it's been decades that this has been looked at, and still we're sitting here discussing it today. One of the things that I noted in the last time was the voting papers didn't come through on time. So I had to be one of those ones that come in for a special vote. Our mail system, now deliveries are cut down to 3 working days a week, or a Saturday, whichever way, or postcode you are in. So it's actually quite a disjointed system. What it was, I found, and many other people. So do we know how many of our voters actually were forced to do special voting due to the fact that they didn't get their voting papers legitimately through the post?
So we had a significant increase in special votes at the last election. A lot of it was didn't receive their papers. Some of that was there were some issues through the Electoral Commission dropping people off the roll.
Yeah.
Because
all sorts of things.
there was issues there. But I can say this time around, the delivery period, the time frame New Zealand Post and DX have to deliver our voting papers has been extended.
Good.
Because both have said it wasn't viable for them to do it within the 3-week window. They've now got 4 weeks. We will be using DX.
Yep.
And DX's plan is that they will move resource around the country and have a week delivering all voting papers in each location. So we
Okay.
will know when that will be, and we will be able to communicate that. So it's strengthened that. But if you're not on the roll,
That's right.
or you've moved address recently, any of those things,
You're not captured.
you won't be captured, and we will do what we can to ensure that people know that you come in and see us, and we will do a special vote with
Okay.
you.
A couple other things. I mean, I am more in favour of doing a polling booth situation, but then my head comes back to worry about people that have disabilities can't see for sight. So having a phone dictation service for them to make sure that they're not spoiling the voting paper is really important. One of the other things that we've come across is when you are electioneering and you're being invited to go around all the rest homes, and I've asked each time, whether it's central government elections or local, what happens to the residents' papers that are not in a medical fit health to vote? I was told that the depending on what the family felt, they would go with what the family felt. So this is a voting paper for an individual that's incapacitated.
Yeah.
So where's our protection there? Where's their protection?
Yeah, I can add to that. So you could argue that the family could take it away and fill it in for them. You know,
Or the staff?
Darren's always been a Labor voter, we'll say. So the family, as he loses his marbles, say, oh, we'll put a tick in there for that. Or alternatively, but the flip side of that is, I could vote on my children's phones because I can get access to my children's phones. Not all children have passwords that protect their phones. So, you know, if my partner and some of the grandkids that are around home leave their phones sitting around, I could multiple vote as well if I want to.
Yep, I understand that. But if we're looking at how many of our New Zealand people that are enrolled to vote that are in medical homes or rest homes, how many of them in their votes and their security to vote are actually not secure, and
I
other
think-
people are voting on them? So
I
what
think
I'm looking at,
there are people that have, Leslie will tell me what the technical word is, the power of attorney for somebody.
is
So
it
I
asked for
notice
when they're voting?
you can exercise that right, I think, on behalf of the person that's infirm.
Yeah. I mean, it's good, yeah, I mean, that concerns me, is that there is this grey area, and that does need to be addressed. It shouldn't be kept out of this. There needs to be a mechanism that actually makes sure that it's quite clear how and how not that can be utilised and used.
And so some of that will rely on, for example, you should have all received your enrolment update letters.
Yes. No, not yet.
That is a means.
No, I
if
haven't, not yet.
People if you've moved into care, then that may be an opportunity that you then drop off the roll if you don't take some positive steps. So there are some measures, but basically it comes down to if the person, you know, an elderly parent, for example, is not able to vote, that you leave their voting document and destroy it because they can't vote. And I just also wanted to say telephone voting for our low vision community. So that has always been a service provided for national elections. It hasn't been provided
Needs to be.
for local government. It will be this time.
Great.
So it's been provided through our service providers
Yeah, I think that's
for the very first
fantastic.
time, which is a good development.
That's great.
Right, so I've got Pania, Tom, then Ellen.
Okay, just my thoughts around it all is postal voting has always presented more risks as noted by Councillor Soper, and yes, I was aware of some of those. The online voting is the way of the future, however, I think it's also can be manipulated. All you need is access to other voting papers, and literally that's the other issue. I mean, you could be doing your own children's. I think the polling both face-to-face is probably the safest approach and would actually standardise the voting process, because literally you're rolling up there with one paper and having to split that. Yes, it is going to be an extra cost. But just in regards to the voting paper itself, I think it just needs to highlight that you are not required to choose to allocate a number specified, because there's all that weighs that assumption that you actually have to choose 8 people or whatever out of this amount of people.
Yep. No.
And you may not even know them.
Absolutely. Right. Tom.
Well, clearly there's no perfect system, but I don't so much like the idea of the electronic system, because I think then you exclude people who simply don't have a device or who are computer illiterate. It also means, as Panya just pointed out, that one person in the family could vote for everybody. And, you know, the sort of rorts that Leslie described with postal voting, I think is even easier with electronic voting. You've also got the kind of macro issue of bad actors interfering with it, and you know, they can break into, you know, nuclear facilities, so I guarantee they can break into ICC's voting system. So I don't know there'll ever be complete proof against that. Personally, I favour in-person voting, even if it's more expensive. Going and putting your vote in a voting booth. There should be carve-outs, I think, for people who simply, you know, cannot leave the house or whatever. Maybe, you know, a mail system for that, even an electronic system for that, by people who can enrol for that. But I think for the vast bulk of people, the safest method is to actually physically go and put your cross in the booth.
No, thank you. Right, Alan, and then.
Yeah, I also personally have always supported a polling booth method of voting for all the reasons that my colleagues along to my left have actually mentioned. Yeah, I'm sure an electronic thing could be tapped in, and it would be on a much larger scale than a couple of extra postal ones being sort of done by the same person. But the other thing is, I also think that I also have thought it's a good idea, even if only 30% of the population vote in a polling booth, at least they've gone there and they've thought about what they're actually voting for, as opposed to just having something on your mantelpiece and thinking, oh, we better do that. But also to counter that, I think it would be quite a good idea to have in each suburb a booth open 2 to 3 weeks, 4 weeks prior to the actual election date for people who go shopping who are perhaps disabled, unable to be as physically able to go and vote on election day, to be able to put their vote in early, you know, and there should be one at like South City, one at Windsor, one at Waikiwi, one in Central, or even perhaps 2 in Central. And with that in the booth, I think would be my preferred way going forward.
Yeah, and I certainly think central government elections did that last time around. That was opened up for early voting, not just because you had to have a reason.
But not just one, not one in the
Oh,
line.
no, certainly. You've got to be around town, but I think nationally over 1 million votes were cast in advance of election day in central government. So that actually shows there's that appetite. Now, I think, Trudy, did you want to? No, we're good?
I just wanted to add, I don't advocate that e-voting should be the only method of voting. It should be one of the alternatives. So I acknowledge what Councillor Campbell said, that there are some people who would never adopt e-voting, and it wasn't that I was saying it should be the only voting method available, but it should be in the suite of alternatives available.
And you mentioned that we have DX Mail. Is that a local choice? Just want to signal some concerns here then, because I've been in the post system, and my observations of DXs are low levels of staffing.
Yes.
Very low. I know you said they're going to move them around, but they'll only have a certain ability to move around. The motorbikes that they use do not have capacity for large volumes of mail, so that's going to be an issue where the post ones do have those big electronic bikes, because voting papers, when you get bundles of them, are very big. I know that because I used to deliver them in rural. So I was absolutely inundated in Ototara by the local hospital using DX Mail and people getting appointment letters after the date of the appointment, because they physically couldn't cope with the load. So if somebody went off sick, they just didn't deliver the mail till the person came back. So we'd need some assurances around that, because their capacity is not sharp. And that's not to say Post is great either. They have delays because everything goes to Christchurch and comes back.
Yeah, no, DX are aware of that, and we did have that issue with the by-election. They had some illness, and then we had some snow, which delayed getting some of the votes out. DX have assured us that they are building surge capacity, which NZ Post are doing also for their councils, and of course we will still use NZ Post for our rural deliveries, because they absolutely have that nailed on how you do that.
Yeah, all I'm signalling is if you look at the way DX works in the city, and how New Zealand posties will go down the street and come back.
Yep.
They might only deliver half a dozen boxes. DX will just go to one address and then
Yep.
they'll go a block away to another address because they've got very low volumes.
Yes.
So whether they can pick up that surge, I'd be surprised, but because they've promised that with the health system and they couldn't deliver it.
Yeah. Right. So I think, in summary from that, there is support for moving to a booth system, but looking at an overall makeup of how actually elections are delivered with support of investigating and moving towards having electronic voting as an option, but not the sole means. So, sorry, Alex, you.
Oh, I just wanted to clarify a few things about the concept of electronic voting. So if it was to move to electronic voting, you know, there's been an inference made before, oh, you know, I could just jump on my kid's phone or something like that. That's not how electronic voting systems work. You have an individual unique identifier, like a Real Me account, which actually requires you to have your own, like, it's effectively like a driver's license. It's an online driver's license or identification card that's unique to the individual. So unless you're cloning yourself, I don't think you're going to get any additional votes. Still not 100% secure, as you know, but it is far, it's not just like you just grab another device and just have another vote for a laugh. It is unique to the individual.
I guess, Alex, some of the feed that we were getting before was that while that might encourage young people who are very tech savvy to vote, you might lose some of the older population who will just think this is all way too hard.
I agree
I
with
used to have a
you.
form that I put back into.
I do agree with you, Mayor Clark, but I do think that we will find that as time goes on, there won't be a generation that is no longer digitally literate.
Yep.
So it is coming. It's just when, really.
Yeah,
Yeah.
wow,
Mm.
yeah.
The other thing I was going to suggest, Michael, is whether there's scope for us to suggest that a number of councils could trial the electronic stuff as opposed to everybody doing all in one hit. So could Invercargill, could Christchurch, could Wellington,
want
something,
you'd
do
want a mix.
digital and the rest not do digital.
Yep.
See how that went.
No,
We might be
absolutely.
viable given that we only have one community board and no wards.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
well, that's true too.
Okay.
Right, thank you for that. Right, issue 4, which you've already started touching on, is the provider of local elections. The reason councils have done this is councils have always done their own elections. I will say we were one of the last councils to move to having a provider provide the technical running of the elections, so that's the vote, counting and things like that. And one of the reasons we made the move was our equipment was at end of life, and to buy the new licenses and software as well as the scanning equipment was a significant amount of money. It was actually quite scary how much that was going to cost. It simply was not worth it. But the key message I think that sort of gets a bit lost in this is we may have contracted that provision out to a provider. They don't run the election, I do. They provide me with the technical backup and the ability to count the votes. How the election is conducted down here is the responsibility of the electoral officer and the deputy electoral officer. That's not to say the Electoral Commission they have a far better reach. But the caveat with that is the Electoral Commission will support us through our elections this time with one person based in Dunedin for all of Otago Southland,
Yeah.
as well as having a national office who will support us with
That's
any
a good resource.
enrolment checks we need to take for people when you're getting nominated. But that is what they will do. The Electoral Commission use local government as an easy test run to get people contact details updated for the general election next year, because it's that first sort of roll update round, and is very useful for them. It's that the Electoral Commission has far greater spending power because they have central government backing. I get my budget from what I can justify to the esteemed people sitting over behind you, and then they bring it through to you to approve. And look, I have to say my budget is quite generous compared to what some of my colleagues get to spend. That's not a reason to take it off me.
I'll just jot that down right now.
Noting that.
Too late.
It means that we
We're
can
gonna
actually
move
do,
it around.
we can do more
Yes.
to engage with our community, and this can only be a good thing. As I said, it's been something that has been discussed for a long time, and I know the Electoral Commission has gone through saying, yes, we want to do this, to no, we don't want to do this. It's not a reason to advance with it, but it's, I think you would probably find, again, there would be an increase of costs to you for the Electoral Commission to deliver this, when you consider that the information there is councils tend to spend about 50 cents per elector on promoting. The Electoral Commission spends $4 per elector promoting and running. That money has to come from somewhere, and unless central government is prepared to come to some form of a party with us, that cost will fall back on local government to cover.
The recommendation is by way of levy.
Yeah. So with that, happy for any questions in the discussion on this one, noting that we've already started it. Leslie?
Just to continue it, I've thought for a long time that the commission is the way to go nationwide. You know, there are individual, very well administered local elections, Mr. Morris, but I think that the time has come where that greater reach of the commission nationwide and the ability to promote and administer nationwide just makes it, the time has come if we're going to up the recognition of the importance of local elections. I think the Commission probably has the ability to do that in a way that is not necessarily happening at the moment, where things are a bit disjointed across the nation. Unfortunately, that does mean that draft recommendation 16 talks about a levy as the funding mechanism. I think it is quite realistic to say that central government is not going to cough up to fund local elections, and that a levy is probably the way to go, which means that it's going to take a few years of back and forward reflection and consultation on how you would set a levy and how you would convince local government to agree that that levy was reasonable. But I think the time has probably come to go down that route.
Evelyn?
Yeah, I think on the whole, support what Councillor Soper is saying, because I think consistency also means that people actually know what, you know, if the look of the papers is similar, if the promotional material looks similar, people recognise, oh, that's what this is, as opposed to what did the City Council sent me this time. You know, also I think the consistency in the application of standards, I guess is the word I'm looking for. You know, means that it doesn't matter where you go in the country, but the way that you will do things will be uniform. The way that layouts will be, you know, when you go into a voting booth in a central government election, it's all laid out in a certain format. You know where you're going, you know what you're doing. So for consistency, however the method, I go for Electoral Commission. And perhaps if we're thinking about what is, apparently we're going to talk about it soon, the 4-year term thing, if both organisations were on 4-year terms, you basically could have permanent staff running electoral processes, because you've got cycles of 2 years barring by-elections. So there may be some extra professionalism possibilities that come from that. Not quite sure how that would work, but I think that's what we see in some countries overseas, where electoral officers are actually, it's their full-time job and they just go from one electoral cycle to another, either preparing or post-election wash-ups. So perhaps New Zealand could be the same in that respect.
Ria?
Thank you. When I look at the draft paper and the information that they've provided us with, and I look at the recommendation of 15, and I am in support of the Electoral Commission taking up the role of handling local body elections to coincide and working with central government. One of the things, though, that I've looked at is it's really important that each local council doesn't lose their voice under the Electoral Commission, so that the preference from council and how we wish to move forward in our voting area is actually upheld. But then that is some significant change in legislation. I look at one of the bullet points there, and it says about increasing their board members to 5 board members, and one of them must know something about local government and local elections. You kind of almost wonder and think, should they not know that now already? And one person for the whole country? Well, I think we could run into some issues there, but that's for them to see that. So I'm in favour of the Electoral Commission looking after our local body elections as well. Just the orange man thing, I mean, it's such a big brand for our central government voting. And to distinguish the two, if we're going to run into a 4-year term or what have you in the future, to differentiate, or to have difference between local and central government, the orange man might need to become an orange woman.
It's an orange person.
So people
think
know
that's-
that there's a difference.
Or an orange family.
Or an orange family. So, it's great. We know it for the central government, but there has to be a unique something there so that people know, we're actually at local government voting time now, not at the orange man, we're at the orange lady or family or what have you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm noting board support to move to the Electoral Commission, but the devil will be in the detail is what I'm picking up. I can say one of the interesting things that I think will come from this is that you will probably be forced to have an electoral system, STV or FPP. There won't be a choice, because I don't know that the Electoral Commission will be able to administer all the elections with all those different voting systems. It's just an interesting thing, but again, as I said, it's one of those detail things that we probably don't need to worry about today, but in principle the support is there. I think we can probably quickly deal with the 4-term year. I think pretty much, from what I've picked up, everyone's in support of moving to a 4-year term.
Including apparently the Prime Minister.
Yes.
Yeah, but there are,
Can I?
there are fishhooks of that as well.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
The only way I see that working is if we had the local government and central elections in the same year. So,
Why?
well,
I want them
if
separately.
you stop and think just about Three Waters, what happens if we get halfway through a 4-year term and the government goes from left to right or right to left, and the whole ballpark changes for you?
That's
That
exactly
can't
the
ha- won't-
scenario
What
in
difference
which
does it
we're
make?
operating now.
Well,
Difference, Bobby.
There's- yeah.
well, why couldn't we do it both at the same year?
I think it's too confusing.
It's too confusing. Yeah.
Completely separate.
I think they should still.
Well, I'm not
dovetail
suggesting
each
at the
other
same
like
time,
they
but
do
you
now,
could do
just
one 3 months ahead of the other one.
No, different year, opposite years like they are now.
Yeah, again, I think broad support, but again, devil in the detail. Leslie and then Ria.
Yeah, part of what I was going to say was that, yes, I do support a 4-year term. I do put the caveat on that, as everyone knows, 1967 and
Yes.
1990, there were referendums on this very issue, comprehensively rejected by the
Yeah.
New Zealand population. However, that does not mean that it is not a conversation we shouldn't have, because we should. There are many reasons, democracy and accountability-wise, why the 4-year term is a far more sensible 4-year term. But one of the things I wanted to say with that was, in bringing in the 4-year term, I would absolutely want us to submit that it should be for both local government and central government and the it should be staggered in such a way that there is never an opportunity for the two elections to take place in the same year. That would be an invitation to disaster, overload, swamping of the Electoral Commission, and a lot of problems that could be avoided. So, contrary to what the Mayor has just said, I would like to see that any move to a 4-year term for both local and central government would continue to mean that those elections never took place in the same year in New Zealand. From the point of view of the accountability issue, a lot of people in the last 2 referendums rejected the possibility of a 4-year term because they wanted to hold the government accountable every 3 years. Actually, there's not a lot of difference. The accountability level in a 4-year term is just as high, or if you're a pessimist, just as low as for a 3-year term. But the amount of sensible work that can be done in a 4-year term, and the possibility of better legislation and for central government and better local government decisions in more timely manner is enhanced by 4-year terms. And it's, yeah, as I say, despite having been rejected twice before, it is one of those conversations that does need to be brought forward again. And people's views may have changed because the last referendum was 1990. A great deal of water has gone under the bridge since 1990. We haven't had a 1-term government in New Zealand since 1972. And some of people's fears about changing to a 4-year term is that you were letting a bad government stay in place for 8 or 12 years. But actually, the world has somewhat changed.
Thank you. I've got Ria, then Alan.
In many ways, I do support what Councillor Soper's saying. Back in the 1990s, when that referendum was held, it was a resounding no for a 4-year term, and I think that although we've got this draft from Local Government New Zealand to look through, many members of our public probably don't know that we're submitting on this and what our intentions are, and that does make me slightly nervous. However, my overall concern about a 4-year term, and I've kind of touched on it last week just very lightly, and Leslie, that you've said if we have an undesirable government, how do we boot them out? Because that's what Kiwis want to know. I have that same mindset for local council. If we have a councillor or a mayor that is detrimental to this role, and I'm not saying here or or anywhere, but there have been, very strong political disagreements. There's been behaviours that I don't think that strengthening up the code of conduct is actually going to make it any more tighter than what we've got now. So that makes me nervous. I guess for me, I'd want to see something, a mechanism there that if something seriously happens, councils can, or legislation can, help protect a local council by having a mechanism of removing councillors or a mayor. We know that we have DIA that can come in with commissioners and all that sort of stuff, but surely if it's that serious to get them here for that, and they want to work on relationships and fix them, surely there should be something, a mechanism there before it gets to that stage. And unfortunately, I don't have strong faith in the accountability that we're being told that they can help fix that.
No, and I think that's part of that wider package, and I will note that the Americans, for example, have their recall hearings where a certain number of voters sign essentially a petition to have a vote to determine whether an elected member, an elected member, which of course in America is pretty much everybody, can be recalled from that position and then a new person elected in. So there are mechanisms available to do that, right? And so I've got Alan and Tom.
Me first?
Alan first.
Oh, yeah, I was just, I'm first, Tom, thank you very much. Yeah.
No, it's just you looked at me, but it was actually you.
Yeah, I know, because I was behind you, that's right. Yeah, you always remember that when there's an election, it's the will of the people, whoever is elected at any position. So if the the 4-year term's chosen, well then the 4-year term's chosen. I mean, I think it's time, if you're going to get stuff done, you do need a wee bit longer to get things done, and I do agree with probably draft recommendation 17 and 18 as they are written here. I mean, I think that sort of probably encompasses it perfectly in my view, and remember that by having a 4-year term, this is just a small thing, but you're obviously going to save a wee bit of money because every 12 years you only have 3 elections, not 4. So it's a bit of a saving if you go to the polling method, which is a wee bit more expensive.
Tom, then Leslie.
Thanks. I'm not a huge fan of the idea of changing to 4 years, but I'm not against it either. But the strongest argument for 4 years is that if you assume that there is a, let's say, a 3-month kind of wind up at the beginning and a 3-month wind down at the end, then you lose about 17% of the total triennium, you know, and that. If it's 4 years, it's about 12%. So you've got more, it's the same argument with 12-hour shifts, actually.
Yeah.
You've just got more useful time spent. So on balance, I would probably favour it. I mean, it's not in here, but you find that if you go to a 4-year term, I think there's an argument, in my view, of having a limit in the number of times, number of terms that a member can serve. Nothing in here about that. But I mean, if you compare governance in the commercial field, then nearly every board that I'm aware of has got 3-term maximums.
Yeah.
You know, unlimited number of terms.
They only do 2 or 3
You know, pardon?
They never do the whole board, they only do a wee few at a time.
Oh yeah, no, that's
That works well.
well, yeah. So I mean, it's not mentioned here, but in my view, that's something that should be considered too. You know, 3-term, because that would mean then 12 years that someone had been in council. Usually then you've got a carve out for somebody who's chair, a carve out for somebody who's mayor, you know, they'd be allowed a 4th term. But anyway, in balance, I support a 4-year term.
Leslie.
Thanks,
I'm
Michael.
not pointing any elbows.
You just reminded me that I had meant to say, as part of a move to a 4-year term, we could put in our submission that the recall measure could be looked at as a mechanism to give comfort to those who believe that the 3-year term gives them more ability to throw people out as early as possible. And it probably is, because of the way New Zealanders have voted on this issue before, it probably is necessary to have some mechanisms as part of a package that gives some comfort that there are ways in which something like recalls could happen.
No. Thank you all. Right, so that concludes the LGNZ paper as it was positioned. There were just 3 matters that came up.
Number 20? We haven't dealt with number 20 yet, have we?
Yeah.
Oh, number 20, as in recommendation 20. Sorry.
Code of conduct.
Oh, so it was just strengthening code of conduct. So that was included for them as part of their 4-year term.
Yeah.
I think the general thrust of those conversations is that most people support having some form of backup, whether it's an increased code of conduct or whether it's a recall provision or both.
I suppose what I was saying is
Yeah.
Both.
Was the sense I got was that there was general support. Again, a lot of it will depend on what that detail actually looks like. I think the submission at this stage, I would be drafting along the lines of that there is broad support to do this and to investigate how these mechanisms could work, increasing the code of conduct, but also looking at a recall provision, but that, you know, obviously those positions would then need to be brought back to councils to endorse, should LGNZ wish to then advocate that as a mechanism through to central government to consider. Okay, I probably won't use quite so many words as that to write it down,
Yeah,
but it'll be something
we
like
get the
that.
gist. Yeah.
But again, I will circulate the draft and invite feedback. So if anyone has views or wants to comment on something I've written, then that's absolutely fine, because at the end of the day, this will be your submission. It's not mine. So I will be reflecting what the council has to to say. Yeah?
Can I ask just something for clarification?
Yeah.
In the draft recommendation 20, looking through those 4 bullet points, is that, as I read that, so that's telling me that in the current Local Government Legislation Act 2002 with removal of member or mayor, so the current provisions that are there, are they being thrown out and these will be put in? Is that what's being recommended?
No, so
Or
it's saying
as in extras?
so these would be added in.
Right, thank you.
So at the moment, there is no power to remove an elected member.
No,
The only way it happens in basically 3 ways.
incapacitation.
Bullet point 3 is quite a powerful bullet
Yeah.
point. It almost amounts to a recall.
It does, yeah.
Yeah, it's a lined up mechanism, yeah. So there are very few ways. Once you're elected to this table, you are elected to this table. You're incapacitated. You commit an offence that sends you to prison for more than 2 years. So that you commit an offence within a term of imprisonment of more than 2 years. You don't have to be sent for that. And essentially, or you enter into a contract with council
Exceeding 25.
over $25,000, and that invalidates your.
Can I,
Also the option that a district court judge can
Yes.
declare you
Yes.
unfit for the job.
yeah.
Yes, and that's essentially it.
Can I ask a sticky question, which is probably an uncomfortable one for some, not here, but around the country? So when you are going through your candidate form, and this comes back to this thing here, disclosing if you've been bankrupt or had financial charges opposed against you, why is that not considered to be important, given that this council, like many, deal with multi-millions of dollars of funding that we have a governance responsibility to? Why is that check not there, but it's there at central government? Could that be something that's discussed, or because it falls into this here?
It certainly, that absolutely could be discussed, but it's not currently a criteria that we can use.
Is there any, I mean, would there be appetite to recommend back to Local Government New Zealand they look at the criteria for candidates standing? Because if you're saying it's okay, you've been bankrupted 2 or 3 times, but we'll allow you to be in charge of $1 million entity.
I mean, the good thing is,
Or you could be
I
president,
guess
yes.
the other thing is that
I mean, is that
two out
safety?
of every 3 startups in the country fails,
Correct.
and most of those fail by bankruptcy or
Mm.
liquidation.
I think
I'm just
part
wondering.
of the issue is that if you are now if you have been discharged from your bankruptcy, the principle of our justice system is that
That's
you
where
have
it
served your
stops.
term.
That's where it stops, every 7 years.
And
Yeah.
while bankruptcy is a civil matter, if you've been
Civil.
discharged, you have served your term and you are,
Good to go again, go around the board?
yep.
Okay.
At the end of the day,
If-
it's
if
up to the
you-
people.
Just asking
It
that
may become
question.
If you
public
are an
in the
undischarged
election.
bankrupt, then yes, that would be
it's a different question.
a different question entirely. But if you're a discharged bankrupt, pretty much in our justice system, you've served your term like you have for any criminal or other conviction, and you are, back
But,
in the
No, I only ask because when I was
same
going
realm
through
as
that, I
anyone
thought,
else.
If somebody was like that, it would probably come up during the election campaign possibly, you see.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then it's up to the people if they want to choose that person or not.
absolutely. I was just, as I was looking at that, was one thing that came into my head was what if they're, not, I'll just ask the question.
Thank you all for that. So the last 3 topics we've got were ones that were raised when this paper was presented to council, noting that we've got 20 minutes to go. So you can all enjoy luncheon before we come back for community wellbeing and regulatory. And so one of them was the election of the mayor. I think Councillor Pottinger raised this one, suggesting that the mayor should be elected from amongst the ranks of the councillors, like the regional council does with the chairperson, rather than as a discrete election. And while it's not something LGNZ have opened up in their discussion document, it is certainly something that can be raised through in our submission to them that they should be considering if there is general interest to have this as a topic. Alan, you're
I
first off
don't
again.
support that at all in any way, shape or form. I think the mayor should be elected by the community.
Tom?
I agree with Alan. I think we must have a situation where the mayor is independently elected, rather than somebody who depends on, maintaining relationships around about this table. Sometimes it's essential that the mayor's got to be able to disagree with council without fearing that he's going to lose his job as a consequence of that. So I think the current method is by far better.
Thank you. Evelyn?
So it may not come as a surprise that I am in opposition to that viewpoint. I view with alarm the increasingly presidential style of campaigning for mayors around the country and what that results in. I think that most bodies that are democratically elected find it within themselves to look at a person that they think can lead them. I don't think necessarily if the ratepayers, the voters, consider people sufficiently respected to be able to sit at the table, that there is any difference in those members then choosing the person from within themselves who they feel is best suited to lead them for the term. Note that I said for the term. I don't see it as a you're in favour this month and out of favour next month sort of proposition. I do think that you need to have stability, but I think the first amongst equals approach, where your peers select you because they know whether or not you have the capacity, whether or not you have the commitment, because they've sat with you at the table and they've assessed how you respond to the situations with which we're faced. I don't think that looking at the number of first-time candidates that became mayor, it can be a little bit disconcerting when you hear and see the sorts of comments and the sorts of ways that some of them campaigned, that they have no real perception of that they're there as a team. I will do, I will have, I will make. That is not valid for a councillor, nor is it valid for the chair or mayor or whatever title you give to the person. It is a team that makes those decisions. The only time the leader is on their own is when they're performing a civic function, and even then, often members of the council are there to support. So it is the team that's doing things. But however, I recognise that I am probably relatively lonely in this position.
Right, well this has engaged quite a few people, so I have Barry, Trish, Alan, Ria and Leslie. And Tom.
Yep. Me?
Barry, yes, first.
Yeah, I'm totally against what Evelyn's saying. I'm quite happy with the public choosing the mayor. All the mayoral candidates get their option to put their points forward. Yeah, I don't think it's a very good idea for a block of people like us to be appointing a mayor by ourselves. I think it's a public decision.
Thank you. Trish?
I support that current practice. I believe that the public should vote for the mayor. My concern about any change would be that at the first or second meeting of a council, when there are, say, in all due respects to those at the table, there are experienced councillors who have been there for some time, it may be difficult not to appoint those even though they may not seem appropriate. So I think it needs to come from the people as to who the mayor should be.
Thank you. Alan again.
Another extremely important reason why I have my view is that when I personally joined council, I joined for the fact that I was probably going to give up a day a week and of my time to do this role. And I'm sure around this table there'll be quite a few people that are of that mind. So you're prepared to give up a day, but we all know that when you become mayor, that's a full-time job. So if you're going to pick from people around the table for that particular role, there'd probably be maybe half the people here wouldn't want to be part of that choice anyway, because they're only prepared to do a day a week. Some of us actually have other jobs, other roles, things that we do. So, and the mayor is a full-time job. And if you ask the mayor, I mean, he works in the day and he works in the night. You know, pretty much 5, 6, 7 days a week. So that would, disenfranchised or make so many people that are around the table unwilling to actually even put their name forward to be the mayor. So I'll leave it to the people.
Right. Ria?
I'm neither opposed or and I'm in the middle really, and the reason being, you know, currently now we have central government parties that elect their own leader, and the rest of them are voted through the general election, and it's the best person for that job through that party. You know, let's be quite frank. The position of a mayor is not an easy role. You have to be able to manage various relationships and what have you, and have your handle on everything that is coming before you. It's not a sexy job. It doesn't overall pay well according to people. You know, it's not an easy thing to do, but it does require a respect and understanding of what you've been elected for. I'm all for giving people the democratic right to vote, and that's something that I don't think my mum will ever change on, but I'm looking at other councils or other unity authorities that actually had this and do this, and it works well. So I guess for me, you know, I'm very much like, I'd be led by the public. I'm not for it, but I'm not opposing it. But I realise that that role of mayor is a very, very important role, and you've got to have all your ducks in line to have all the skills that you can give to not only here, but also out to your community. And it's a taxing job.
Thank you. Right, we have Leslie, Alex, Pania, Grant, and probably Mayor Clark. Yep.
Thank you. So it's a very legitimate issue to put on the table. At the end of the day, the mayor of any local body is one vote among 12 or 13 or whatever number of positions your local body maintains. Your mayor is only one vote of many, and part of the mayoral role is to try and build a consensus, because you have the experience and the ability to do that around your table on issues. Whether or not it is better to have that individual voters voting individually for the mayor, or the traditional pattern of our political parties that the leader has been chosen, and you are then voting for the party with that leader at the election. And in the case of the regional councils, of course, the regional council do choose their own chairperson, and that has worked pretty well over a number of years for our regional councils. So I actually think it's a very legitimate issue to put on the table for consideration in this whole mix of what's being considered.
As a discussion topic rather than a position, right, Alex?
Thank you. To Alan's point before, I have already notified my workplace that should I be successful with the mayoral role, I will be resigning. So, because I also believe that the mayor's role is a 24/7 full-time job. I think it's really important for us to talk, if we're talking about the way that the mayor is elected, that we actually have a talk again about STV voting system instead of FPP. I know it's too far gone now, but I think it's really something that we should be considering, because even when you look at STV, if your preferred candidate doesn't get it, then your vote gets transferred to your next preferred candidate, right? So what you end up is a poll at the end of far better representation than just a popularity vote of FPP. I, like Tom, and completely agree that it should be the mandate of the people, but STV's voting systems will give you a far better reflection of what those people actually want.
Thank you. Pania?
I just wanted to reinforce Evelyn's comment. I just think that the mayor's position should be picked by the public, not from around.
I didn't say that.
Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry. I'm in support of that the public picks the mayor's position.
Right, online Grant.
Sorry, I thought you
Grant?
Yes.
Yeah, hi. I'm in support of the public picking. I think it's the public see the mayor's role as a really important position within their community, And I think giving them a voice around that really important position is vital for democracy. So I'm in favour of the people choosing.
Thank you. Right, I think, Alan, you had your hand up before we come to Mayor Clark to finish this one off.
I did. I was just going to make a comment on the Councillor Bond's comment before. Not a bad comment, but when Parliament elect their leader from within, remember that every parliamentarian, every elected member, that is a full-time job. So they're all doing a full-time job, whereas we're all doing part-time jobs. And if you had a situation like we're talking about here, you might get people who are only prepared to give up a day who won't bother standing at all. So you're going to chop a whole lot of people out who would possibly become councillors that won't become councillors because they don't want to even be in the running for being a mayor.
So the reason why I said that was to show that there was already a mechanism system in place in central government where parties and boards select their leader.
Yeah, I know, but they're all full-time workers.
No,
So it's a
they're
full-time job.
not. No, they're not, because
MPs aren't,
there
is
are
it?
many parties where it is the party, not the members of parliament, who elect the leader.
Yes.
In fact, most of our New Zealand political parties have a comprehensive
Yeah, but
party vote for the leader, not a vote
Yeah, but
of
every
full-time
person who's eligible
parliamentarians.
to be the leader of that party, their job is a full-time job.
But you're not,
Not necessarily.
No.
That's right. I don't know that we will resolve that one
No.
today.
No.
So I'll let Mayor Clark have the final word on this one.
So, straightforward for me, I think the mayor should be elected by the public. There's two reasons for that. One is that if you leave it to day one or day two to have a vote between 13 elected members, you automatically split the council if you've got more than one candidate wanting to be mayor. So you start off in the early stages with some division, where the way we have it at the moment, you don't. You get the mayor, and whether you like it or not, that's the person that goes forward. The other observation I've had is I've had the ability to, I guess, be a little bit closer to Environment Southland and the way they elected their chairs. And Darren can close his ears for a few minutes, but I've talked to his wife, partner about that as well. And it's not healthy to say that's a healthy process. I think there's some unease around that election process, was my observation.
Right. Thank you. I think I've got enough there. And probably the last topic we've got there, I think the accountability of elected members, LGNZ remit, I think we've largely covered that with our full-term year discussion. I'm quite comfortable with that. And so the last one, for a very quick conversation on the power of the Office of the Mayor. The Office of the Mayor has relatively limited powers. It's a section in the Act, and that's basically it. So I think this is something you raised, Mayor Clark, so I will defer to you first.
Sure. So there are some voices, I guess, at the national level, which is not LGNZ, that feel that powers of a mayor should be wider than they currently are. So if I think about my situation, I don't have a budget. I have very little ability to direct anything. So that's not an easy place to be at times. And there is some suggestion when they look at Auckland as an example, and Mayor Brown there, that he's, I guess, grabbed the bull by the horns and set up his own office, and he's got his own comm staff and so on, where I'm very much reliant on council providing that there is potential for another model, which is taking away from what's currently provided by council into an office of the mayor, a little bit like, I guess, parliamentary services will provide services to most MPs, but I think the Prime Minister has their own little wee group of staff and budget and what have you, and some discretion with that. But I'm quite happy to operate under either system, but that's something that's definitely on the horizon.
Thoughts? Welcome. Tom?
Probably Alex will remember. I can't remember who said it, but at the LGNZ conference in Wellington, there was a government minister who spoke, it might even have been the Prime Minister, who spoke about the fact that they were thinking about giving the mayors some executive authority. Do you remember that?
Vaguely,
Pardon?
vaguely, not.
Yeah, no, it was a passing remark.
Was it yeah, okay.
I mean, a whole lot of chief executives fell off their seats. That was the most noticeable thing. But I mean, I think it would, somebody, when we were talking about the reason why mayors are elected directly, we talked about the fact that they are considered actually a very important figure in the public's mind. And I would be surprised if many people in the public realised how limited their powers and authority are. I think most people think that the mayor has got a significant amount of authority. In fact, they've got almost none. They've got the authority of mana, basically, and the authority of the ability to persuade and, you know, build coalitions, as it were, you know, picking up Leslie's point around issues, but they've got no real authority. And in my view, the public don't understand that at all. They elect a mayor in the expectation that what the mayor includes in their, you know, what they say that they will be able to do, that they actually will be able to do that. I don't think anybody expects everything will happen, but they expect some of these things will happen. And in reality, when the mayor's elected, of course, he finds or she finds that their ability to achieve things is very, very limited. So without having any thoughts about how it might be done or what might change, it has surprised me as a first-time councillor. It has surprised me how limited, to the point almost of zero authority, that the mayor actually has. So I think there is room for increasing that, but there was a government minister who did say that government were thinking about some executive accountability for authority for the mayor. What that'll look like, or whether they've just dropped the idea, I don't know.
So just as a reflection of that, Tom, it's interesting talking to some ministers who have a similar sort of role to a mayor. I guess they lead government departments or government ministries. They can direct the chief executive. In this council, and probably in just about every council in the country, the mayor cannot direct the chief executive. It takes a coalition, as somebody said before, the mayor plus 6 friends to be able to dictate, yes, I want that done, because the staff can push back. But it doesn't happen in the government sector. The government sector that I've worked in, if the minister said, I want this done, it gets done. They don't have to go to cabinet and get all the other MPs to agree to it as well. So I guess that's where they see the differences.
But Leslie, then Alex.
Thank you. I would go as far as to say that if there is any intention of giving mayors in New Zealand that sort of executive authority, that is the cold, dead hand to destroy local government democracy. And I would not wish to be a part of that for any reason whatsoever. The mayor is one of 13 in our case, or whatever number your council happens to have as seats. They are one vote. People understand very well in New Zealand, one thing people understand about local government is that the mayoral position is largely a ceremonial one. So yes, they do like to see the mayor out there wearing mayoral robes, officiating at various ceremonies, etc. But the idea of the cold, dead hand of executive authority and the ability for the mayor to command, let's just get rid of councils altogether. Let's just elect a mayor then. Why do you need the other 12? Why do you need the other, however many your council consists of? If you're going to go down that route, why not just have an elected mayor who can take all the executive authority they like? I do not agree at all that there is the need or the impetus from New Zealand voters to go down that route of mayoral authority. It is totally against what local government in New Zealand is about.
No, Alex, then Ria, and then Evelyn.
Yeah, I think much along the same lines as Councillor Soper, I think that passing executive to the mayor would be just an absolute perversion of democracy. I'm also of a contrary opinion to Councillor Campbell. I honestly don't think that you have zero authority as the mayor. I think you have significant authority. You just need to lead your team to get there.
That's right.
You need to lead and guide your team to get to said solution using system and process. You're not a CEO. You can't just executive order, and you should not be able to just decide things on your own. That is the entire point of democracy. It's leading the team to get there that's important, not just being able to make willy-nilly decisions on your own.
Thank you. Ria?
I'm exactly sitting with Councillor Soper and Councillor Crackett for the very reasons. One of the things that is quite apparent, if you want to control the money side of a council, then apply for the CEO job. Don't apply for mayor, don't apply for council, apply for the CEO job. Work your way in your career and use the right pathway for you to have that power if that's what you think they have. We're here to look at the governance side of what we provide for our city. In terms of the mayoral side, and Mayor, you talked about parliamentary services, there's provisions for all MPs to have parliamentary services funding, but that's all very, very highly capitulated and very strict in how that's rolled out. I've just said to Darren before, you know, in terms of a mayor, we're one of the only councils that actually provide a mayoral car. You know, don't take the car. Save the money from that and use it for something else. Hand the car back. You know, it's like there are things that you can do, making your decision to be the mayor. Very much like Leslie, it'll be a cold day in hell when our public would allow that type of mayoral executive to occur. Day one, how many executive orders will that person try and have? You know, if you want that sort of rolling mechanism, then have an aggregated, selected member of parliament be your mayor.
Thank you. I'll just note that if a mayor takes a car, then there's a salary sacrifice as part of it.
Thank you.
Just note that. Evelyn?
I think the cold dead hand analogy is probably where I'm at. Having to work as a team is part of the checks and balances that we have in this democracy. Mayor as dictator, mayor as predicator of what the outcomes will be, actually makes a nonsense of having a round table, or an oval table in our case, like this. We all have some influence because we've been sent here to do that. That would make a nonsense of all of that. I think we need to be really cautious about expansion of authoritarianism. We're watching examples of this as we live and breathe. We don't need to be doing it ourselves. We can let those other countries do it for us, and we can watch from the sidelines. It's impacting on us. We don't want to have this happen here. I'm not saying that we're necessarily going to elect a dictator at the next council elections, but the risk would be there. If we extended those powers, then it would be appealing to people with those kind of tendencies. And teams is what this is about to me. And a leader of a team is somebody who builds consensus. A dictator loses, I think, the goodwill of both the table and the community at some point, but the damage could be considerable before we get there. Having a secretariat is a whole different question, and that is a budget and discussion. There has been that sort of formulary here in the past. It doesn't mean that it can't happen again. It just means that this has got to be a conscious decision again of everybody who sits here, that is a good investment of ratepayers' money, rather than the decision of one person that they want to build an empire around them and insulate them from whatever they think is the risk that's coming at them. But that also implies, I think, that the mayor is not getting good service from the staff, which I think would be a contentious remark to make as well. I am thoroughly opposed to us supporting any move that expands the powers of a mayor.
Thank you. Right, we've got Alan, then I think we need to come to an end because we've hit our 1 o'clock allowance.
I may be wrong, but I think everybody's misconstrued what the Mayor was trying to say there. Everybody's talking about being dictatorial. I think what the Mayor's saying that if the majority of the elected members here decided that this is what we want to do, this is what we're going to do, and then the Mayor went to the Chief Executive and said, hey, look, this is what the Council's decided to do, I would like you to do this, the Chief Executive still doesn't have to do that. That's what he's saying. So he's not talking about doing it on his own. If the majority of the council decide to do something, the mayor still can't go and tell the chief executive, that's what we want to do.
That's exactly how democracy works.
If the
Am I right,
majority of
Nathan? Is that
council
what you're saying?
decided it, then it's been decided at a council meeting and the mayor doesn't have to go to the chief executive because the chief executive's heard it at the council meeting when it got passed as a resolution.
And I could be wrong, but the only reason that a chief executive would be if he had or she had discovered that what we were asking, had instructed to do was extra legal or in other ways outside of legislation, and therefore, yeah.
But I think we're looking at it as if it was two poles where you have essentially no authority, where you cannot make individual decisions, is how I interpret the word authority, or that he becomes a dictator. And there's many models in between. I mean, in Japan and America, even in England, the mayor has some authority. It's not a matter of, there's a continuum of possibilities. And I'm quite sure if government is looking at it, they're not going to be looking at making him into a dictator, that's for sure.
I'd hope not.
Hmm?
I'd hope not. We've seen
You might change your mind.
Well, it seems what...
Right. Thank you, everybody. That's a good way, I think, to end this discussion. It's been a fairly philosophical discussion on the basis of the nature of how you get to be here and what you do in your various roles here. So thank you all for your time. I will circulate a draft submission to you all, and then we'll work out a mechanism to get it confirmed as part of that. Noting that we are too late for the council meeting on the 29th. The submission's due on the 28th. So I will circulate.
Sorry, Mr. Morris, just noting that there were a couple of recommendations that we probably didn't look at because we didn't think they applied to our situation. That was the one about disability support for candidates and the one about Māori wards and things.
Yeah.
I would like to think that we would support the challenges that are faced by both those pools of people. It doesn't apply to us, but there are other councils where it may, the disability one may apply to us, but the Māori wards one doesn't. I'd like to think that we could be supportive of the situation that some of the councils are finding with candidates in those places. With, we know with Māori MPs also that their constituencies are huge. They do face different challenges.
No, I will be drafting in accordance with what we have discussed today, and where I've got questions for you to make a decision, I will highlight that. Mayor Clark, you had something to say to finish?
Well, I guess that was one of the criticisms that's tabled against local government New Zealand, is that regardless of whether we've got a left or a right-wing government, if you want outcomes from government, you've got to work with them. And so pushing back on referendums for Māori wards, which the government has already made decisions on, does nothing but put a wedge between us and the government. I would be opposed to supporting other councils on those issues, that they don't affect us and we should just sit silent.
Right. Thank you, everybody.